All right, everybody, welcome back to Taylor Bible Study. My name is Clay Taylor, and in this episode, we're going to get into Deuteronomy chapter 21. We're going to talk about the law of unsolved murders. All right, so buckle up. Verse 1, the presence of an unsolved murder. And it says in verse 1, if one be found slain in the land which the Lord your God gives you to possess, lying in the field, and it be not known who has slain him. All right, so basically, when a body was discovered in the open field and no one could determine who was responsible for the murder, the matter could not be ignored. The death was clearly not due to natural causes. All right, it bore the marks of violence clearly here. This guy was murdered. In Israel, bloodshed was not just a crime against the individual, it was a direct offense against God and his land. And according to Numbers 35, verses 33 and 34, unavenged blood defiled the land. It says, so you shall not pollute the land wherein you are, for blood it defiles the land, and the land cannot be cleansed of the blood that is shed therein, but by the blood of him that shed it. So, therefore, even when justice could not be carried out on the guilty party, God still required an act of atonement so that the land would not remain under guilt. Interesting. Verses 2 through 6, the procedure for atoning for this murder-polluted land. Pay attention. It says, verse 2, then your elders and your judges shall come forth, and they shall measure into the cities which are round about him that is slain. And it shall be that the city which is next unto the slain man, even the elders of that city, shall take a heifer, which has not been wrought with, and which has not drowned in the yoke. And the elders of that city shall bring down the heifer into a rough valley, which is neither eared nor sown, and shall strike off the heifer's neck there in the valley. And the priests, the sons of Levi, shall come near. For them the Lord thy God has chosen to minister unto him, and to bless in the name of the Lord. And by their word shall every controversy and every stroke be tried. And all the elders of that city that are next unto the slain man shall wash their hands over the heifer that is beheaded in the valley. So, whenever an unsolved murder took place, the elders and the judges were required to investigate and determine which city was nearest to the body. This established local responsibility. The nearest city's elders were then required to take a young heifer, one that had never been used for labor, symbolizing innocence and purity, and they would bring it to an uncultivated valley with flowing water. The heifer's neck was broken there, not on an altar, emphasizing that this was not a regular sacrifice. It was a solemn act of atonement for blood defiling the land. And so the priest would stand by because God had appointed them to oversee matters of judgment and blessing. So after the heifer's neck was broken, the elders washed their hands over its body, and this symbolic act publicly declared, we have investigated thoroughly, and we are not guilty of this blood. And this act is similar to the symbol that we find in Psalm 26, verse 6, I will wash my hands in innocency. Yet it would be meaningless if they had neglected justice, much like Pilate's empty washing of his hands during Christ's trial in Matthew 27, verse 24. That was a symbolic act is worthless when it is unaccompanied by righteousness. The untouched valley, the unworked heifer, and the flowing water all represents purity here. The act proclaimed that the land belonged to God and could not bear the stain of innocent blood. Justice belonged to the Lord, and even when imperfectly executed by the human courts, God demanded acknowledgement of the guilt and plea for cleansing. Verses 7 through 9. The prayer said by the elders as they washed their hands here. It says in verse 7, and they shall answer and say, our hands have not shed this blood, neither have our eyes seen it. Be merciful, O Lord, unto thy people Israel, whom thou hast redeemed, and lay not innocent blood unto thy people of Israel's charge, and the blood shall be forgiven them. So shalt thou put away the guilt of the innocent blood from amongst you, when thou shalt do that which is right in the sight of the Lord. All right, so what does verses 7 through 9 mean? After the heifer's neck was broken, and the elders washed their hands over its body, they were required to make this public declaration. They're confessing before God that they had no part in the crime. Our hands haven't shed this blood, neither have our eyes even seen it. This is not an attempt to avoid responsibility. It is a sincere statement made after a full investigation. They were acknowledging both human limitation, they didn't know who the murderer was, and divine authority, that God must provide atonement when man cannot bring justice. Their prayer continued, "Be merciful, O Lord, unto thy people Israel, whom thou hast redeemed." They appealed to God's covenant relationship with Israel, recognizing him as Redeemer, the one who delivered them from bondage out of Egypt. And this emphasizes that atonement is grounded in redemption. God's people belong to God, and therefore the land that they inhabit must not remain defiled. They're asking God to lay not innocent blood unto thy people of Israel's charge, meaning they pleaded for the stain of bloodshed to be lifted from the land and the nation. And the scripture will conclude, "And the blood shall be forgiven them." And this is God's promise. When his instructions are followed, he provides forgiveness and removes guilt. The passage is going to close with a command and a theological principle. You shall put away the guilt of the innocent blood from amongst you, and you shall do that which is right in the sight of the Lord. Blood guilt was not removed by ignoring the crime, but by acting in obedience to God's revealed law. This act was not pagan superstition either. It's based on divine justice and substitution. And Numbers 35 will declare that innocent blood defiles the land, and it can only be cleansed by the blood of the one who shed it, meaning the murderer, killing the murderer in response. Or by an atoning substitute when the murderer here is unknown. We can't figure out who it is. And so this symbolic sacrifice points towards the ultimate innocent blood that is shed for sin, obviously Jesus Christ. As it is written in Hebrews 9:22, "And almost all things are by the law purged with blood, and without shedding of blood is no remission." The heifer's death did not save souls. It's foreshadowing the perfect substitutionary atonement of Jesus Christ, who alone removes guilt completely through his shed blood. Without the shedding of blood is no remission. This is why when we talk about the shedding of Jesus' blood, his blood being poured out, you can start to see why it is so important. It goes all the way back to the Old Testament. All right, verses 10 through 14, laws that are relevant to family and home situations. All right, let's look at laws regarding taking a wife from amongst captives. Verse 10. "When you go forth to war against your enemies, and the Lord your God has delivered them into your hands, and you have taken them captive, and you see among the captives a beautiful woman, and has a desire unto her, that you would have her to thy wife, then you shall bring her home to your house, and she shall shave her head and pare her nails, and she shall put the raiment of her captivity from off of her, and shall remain in your house, and bewail her father and her mother a full month. And after that shall go in unto her, and be her husband, and she shall be your wife. And it shall be, that if you have no delight in her, then you shall let her go whither she will. But you shall not sell her at all for money. You shall not make merchandise of her, because thou hast humbled her." All right? So let's look at this. This could be a complicated verse for a lot of people. God recognized that in warfare, Israelite soldiers might desire to take a captive woman as a wife. In pagan cultures, women that were taken in war were often abused, quite frequently raped, enslaved, and then discarded. But God, in his justice and mercy, placed clear restrictions to prevent exploitation and to uphold the dignity of even a foreign captive. And this law did not encourage the practice, it was regulating and restraining it, ensuring that Israel would not behave like the cruel nations around them. So, if an Israelite man desired a captive woman, He was not allowed to force himself upon her. He had to bring her into his home, and she had to undergo 3 symbolic actions. She had to shave her head, trim her nails, and remove the clothing of her captivity. And so these acts are representing purification, humility, and a complete break from her old identity and pagan background. It was a physical and spiritual separation from her past. Then she was given one full month to mourn her father and mother, whether they were dead or left behind, allowing her emotional and spiritual transition into Israel's covenant life. During this month period, the man was forbidden to touch her. And this served as 2 purposes. It protected the woman's dignity, and it allowed the man time to reflect. It ensured that his desire was not driven merely by passion or just outward beauty alone. And so this law revealed that marriage was to be deliberate, not an impulsive act of conquest. If after this period the man still desired her, he could consummate the marriage and she became his lawful wife, enjoying the legal full rights and protections of marriage in Israel. She would have full rights. However, if later he no longer delighted in her, then he was not permitted to treat her as property, meaning he could not sell her or enslave her. He had to set her free because he had humbled her, meaning he had taken her sexually and therefore bore moral responsibility towards her. And this was radically protective for this time in history. In the surrounding nations, captive women had 0 rights, none. All right? That's strange to our Western ears, but back then, women did not have rights at all and were quite often seen as beneath men. In Israel, God commanded compassion, restraint, and dignity even towards foreign women. Not just women in general, but even foreign women, which would have even lower view in most of ancient viewpoints and their mindset. And so this law is reflecting God's character, holy, just, and merciful. He's ensuring that victory in war did not become an excuse for cruelty. All right. Verses 15 through 17. The protection of inheritance rights. Verse 15, if a man has 2 wives, one beloved and the other hated, and they have borne him children, both the beloved and the hated, and if the firstborn son be hers that was hated, then it shall be, when he makes his sons to inherit that which he has, that he may not make the son of the beloved firstborn before the son of the hated, which is indeed the firstborn. But he shall acknowledge the son of the hated for the firstborn, by giving him a double portion of everything that he has. For he is the beginning of his strength. The right of the firstborn is his. And so this law assumes an imperfect family structure. One man with 2 wives, one loved and the other unloved. And though polygamy was never in God's design, because Genesis 2:24 will make clear marriage is between one man and one woman, and every time we see multiple women in marriage in Scripture, there is always issues, every single time. Every single time. All right, so it was tolerated in ancient Israel because of the hardness of men's hearts, much like Jesus later said concerning divorce in Matthew 19:8. In these such flawed situations, God enforced justice and righteousness here. He would not allow favoritism or emotional bias to corrupt what was legally or morally right. If the firstborn son belonged to an unloved wife, the father was not permitted to give special rights of the firstborn to a younger son born that was born from his favorite wife that he preferred. All right, God's demanding that the father recognize and honor the true firstborn, regardless of that person's personal preference. This was particularly important because the firstborn son held significant legal and spiritual privileges. He was to receive a double portion of the inheritance. So this is a big deal. So in a family of 3 sons, the estate would be divided into 4 parts. 2 parts for the firstborn and 1 each for the others. Okay? So this is a big deal, and God is not going to allow favoritism here. The firstborn was called the beginning of his strength, echoing Genesis 49:3, where Jacob said to Reuben, "Reuben, you art my firstborn, my might, and the beginning of my strength." The firstborn represents the father's future legacy, strength, and leadership in the family. To deprive the rightful firstborn of his inheritance because of favoritism was not only unjust, it was a direct violation of the order God had established. And this law also serves as a warning against partiality within the family. Scripture repeatedly condemns favoritism, as seen in the problems that are caused by Isaac when he favored Esau and Rebekah favoring Jacob, in Genesis 27, or Jacob favoring Joseph over his brothers in Genesis 37. Favoritism leads to division, hatred, and even violence. And here, God is protecting both justice and family order by mandating that inheritance be based on birthright, not on emotion. And of course, spiritually, this points towards God's own faithfulness. He does not show favoritism in Acts 10 or Romans 2. And he honors his covenants and his promises even when his people are unfaithful. The firstborn belongs to God in Exodus 13, and ultimately this title will belong to Jesus Christ, who is the firstborn amongst many brethren in Romans 8:29, and the firstborn of every creature, Colossians 1:15. While human fathers may act with a bias, God never does. All right, verses 18 through 21, the penalty for a rebellious son. Verse 18 says, "If a man has a stubborn and rebellious son, which will not obey the voice of his father or the voice of his mother, and that, when they have chastened him, will not hearken unto them, then shall his father and his mother lay hold on him, and bring him out to the elders of his city and unto the gate of his place. And they shall say unto the elders of his city, This is our son, is stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey our voice. He is a glutton and a drunkard. And all the men of his city shall stone him with stones, that he shall die. So shalt thou put away evil from amongst you, and all Israel shall hear and fear." So this law is dealing with an extreme case. All right, this was not common. It is not childish tantrums or youthful immaturity. Before we go run off and point this out to our children, look what it says here. But let's not underscore the severity and the seriousness behind it here. A grown son who is chronically rebellious and hardened in sin, and they are openly defiant and they are morally corrupt. The Hebrew wording for stubborn and rebellious indicates a continual, habitual resistance to authority here. This is a son that is past the age of correction, who has rejected discipline, right? When they have chastened him, they've disciplined him, they've brought out the switch, they've spanked, they've done whatever, and he will not hearken. And this son, lives in open sin, and they are described as a glutton and a drunkard. This is not childish disobedience. This is destructive, immoral lifestyle rebellion that we're talking about. So, such a son endangered not only his household, but obviously the entire covenant community as well. So in ancient Israel, the family was the foundation of society and religion. And it's really not any different today. The family is the core unit of an empire. To rebel against parents, God's appointed authority, was to rebel against God himself. In Exodus 20 and Proverbs 30:17. Therefore, if all discipline failed, the parents were required to bring the son to the elders at the city gate. And this functioned as a legal court. You'll notice that the parents themselves could not execute the judgment. Unlike the pagan cultures, like Roman patriapostas, where fathers could kill children at will, Israel required lawful trial, witness, and public judgment. If they were found guilty, the son was to be stoned by the men of the city. And this severe penalty was more about protecting the nation than it was about exacting revenge on the kid. God said, "So shall you put away the evil from amongst you, and all Israel shall hear about this and fear." Public justice served as a deterrent. The goal was not frequent execution. In fact, there is no biblical record of this law ever being carried out. Right? In Jewish tradition, as we see here in the Mishnah, even says that it never occurred, but existed to instill fear, uphold parental honor, and to preserve the nation from moral collapse. But in place nonetheless. And this law is going to warn that a society cannot survive when children rebel against parents and authority without consequence. This is something that plagues Western culture. The breakdown of the home leads to a breakdown of the nation. I cannot emphasize that enough. And all too common in today's society is we want to break down the home. Fatherless households, divorce, adultery, to live a life consumed by entertainment, drugs, partying, pleasures. God saw rebellion against parents as akin to idolatry and blasphemy and worthy of death. Leviticus 20, Proverbs 20, and Romans 1. There is also typological significance here. Israel is often called God's son in Exodus 4:22 and was repeatedly rebellious all through their history, but in Isaiah 1 and Deuteronomy 9. Yet instead of being stoned, God sent forth his own obedient son, Jesus Christ, to die in the place of rebels. He bore the curse for the stubborn sons of men in Galatians 3:13. And this law is going to show the seriousness of sin, the necessity of justice, and the need for a perfect substitute. All right. Verse 22 and 23, the curse upon one who hangs on a tree. Interesting here. This is obviously going to point to the cross. Now pay attention. And if a man have committed a sin worthy of death, and he be to be put to death, and you hang him on a tree, his body shall not remain all night unto the tree, but you shall in any wise bury him that day. For he that hangs is accursed of God. Interesting. That your land be not defiled, which the Lord your God gives you for an inheritance. This law is addressing the treatment of a criminal's body after execution. In Israel, a man guilty of a crime deserving death may have been executed by stoning or another method, and afterward his corpse could be publicly displayed by being hung on a tree or a wooden post. I want you to think with the cross in mind here. And this was not execution by hanging in the modern sense. This is rather the exposure of the body after death for the purpose of public shame. It was considered to be the most severe disgrace, worse than death itself, because it declared that this individual was under the curse of God. However, God also put strict limits on this kind of exposure. The body must not remain all night upon the tree, but it was to be buried before sunset. To leave it exposed longer would defile the land the Lord had given to his people. So even in judgment, God's requiring mercy and restraint. Israel was to show respect for the dead, even the condemned, for all men are still created in the image of God. And this principle is seen again in Joshua 8 and Joshua 10, where the bodies of the defeated kings were taken down before nightfall. And of course, this verse adds the significant explanation for he that is hanged is accursed by God. To be hung on a tree was the sign that one had been judged not only by men, but was under divine rejection. The public display declared this man's sin brought him under God's curse. The New Testament powerfully will apply this passage to Jesus Christ. In Galatians 3, verses 13 and 14 will declare that Christ has redeemed us from the curse of the law, being made a curse for us. For it is written, cursed is everyone that hangs on a tree. And though Jesus himself was sinless, he was crucified, nailed to a wooden tree, and publicly displayed as one cursed by God. He took upon himself the curse that we deserved so that we might receive the blessing of Abraham through faith. The cross was not only an instrument of death, it was a declaration that Christ bore the full weight of divine judgment for sin. Therefore, this law in Deuteronomy is both legal and prophetic here. Legally, it's teaching Israel that justice must be carried out. Must. But without cruel excess. Even judgment must be tempered by mercy. Theologically speaking, it's foreshadowing the gospel. The innocent one that would one day bear the curse so that the guilty could be forgiven. And he was cut off so that we might be brought in. Cursed so that we could be blessed. Exposed to shame so that we could be covered in his righteousness. All right. And that'll cover chapter 21. The notes will be found on the website under Deuteronomy. Thank you guys for joining me.